Hi, everybody. I am Christy Craig. I'm the publisher here at Hidden Timber Books. I want to welcome you on this Sunday afternoon. It's a snowy, cloudy day here in Milwaukee, but it's a great day to sit down with some coffee and enjoy a literary event online. I am thrilled to have Nandini Bhattacharya here today to read from and talk about her novel, Love's Garden. Just to give you a little bit about Nandini, she is a mother, a teacher, and author in Texas. She's published short stories in Story Cape Journal, Raising Mothers, Bangalore Review, and more. She was the first runner-up in Los Angeles Review Flash Fiction Contest. She was longlisted for the Disquiet International Literary Prize and a finalist for the Reynolds Price International Women's Literary Award. So I put a link to her website in the chat. You should stop by there at some point and check out. She's got a lot of different things on her website as far as what she's published and projects down the line. And we are thrilled to host her today to discuss her novel, Love's Garden, which weaves together generations of mothers and daughters through tradition, politics, love, and so much more. So welcome, Nandini. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Christy, and I'm very happy to be here at Hidden Timber. And thanks for those of you who are here. Thank you for taking time on a very quiet Sunday afternoon here in Texas and coming to hear me read. I am grateful for all of that. So I'm going to actually just show you my book first. And maybe at some point I'll post the link for Amazon, or maybe Christy will. But I just want to get started right away with the first part of the book. And before I begin, I should say this book is about three generations of very strong and challenged women from the early 20th century in India up to about the time that the British leave, which is about mid-century. And they are mother, daughter, and then the next generation. And their lives are connected by a number of things like the men in their families and also the many conflicts in the 20th century, the First World War, the Second World War, and also the Indian independence movement. So, without further ado, reading from chapter 1. In the year 1898, in a corner of Britain's far flung empire where the imperial sun is still rampant, a train snakes through a vast plain checkered by bronze, green, and ochre fields of wheat, corn, and millet. A woman stumbles through the train, passing compartments, peering into some, trying to reach the engine at the front. Her name is Saroj, and she wants to stop the train. Stop the train, get off. How can this be happening? Why hasn't Munia come? She promised she would come without fail. Munia knows the stakes. She swore on her honor and her love. People are sleeping, seated, slumped, stretched out, some with their entire bodies and heads covered with makeshift sheets, others in ugly positions that bring no shame, only to the utterly oblivious. The train is completely dark. Here and there, Saroj hears a moan, a whimper, even a low droning. Is that an infant crying, though? Saroj freezes for a long second. No, it's a little girl who has fallen off a bunk. She is lying sprawled on the dirty floor, sobbing as if getting up without her mother's remorseful help is out of the question. Saroj can't wait, can't stop, can't step into the compartment and help her up. No time to lose. Saroj lurches on forward. The engine shrieks again and again as it shreds the night. Saroj begins to think she will not be able to reach that engine compartment where the driver and the stoker are busy urging on the machine like a trained beast. Her legs are giving way. The spirit billows out of her like smoke from an extinguished fire. All is burning. All has burned. She should have burned too. It was her fate. But she erred, she sinned. Had she sinned? Had she erred? The old agony of that dilemma stops her as if someone has just punched her in the gut. She doesn't even try to break her fall to the floor. On the gritty floor of the snaking train, taking her away from everything she has ever known or loved, Saroj dies that night inside. I'm going to just skip to a later part, which is about her daughter. And a little bit into this, we're going to actually do a little PowerPoint where you'll know more about the relationships. But this is her daughter Prem, about 20 years later, married into a family of a very rich man, but a lackey of the British, unpatriotic, anti-nationalist, and it's not quite a happy marriage. But here we go. Prem begins to see the time she's living in. Her name is Prem. The country is swinging between the traditional and the modern, the mercilessly reamed, foreign returned Bengali folk rejecting all things traditional give her the clearest view of who her husband is, or would like to be considered a modern Indian, a westernized Indian, with no patience or tolerance for old ways, old values, still a domestic tyrant, as many of his forefathers have been, but a votary of all things English in name. She doesn't at all chide her women for falling off the ladies' lounge seats, laughing during the screening of the film Bilet Perut. The Bioscope Theatre is paradoxically one of the very few places where Prem can be with any female tribe, unafraid, nearly public, almost free of men. Being a great lady helps clear her path when she walks into the theatre, but the stage is also all that the world isn't. In the bioscope, you can meet so many strangers. Will you come with me to the bioscope? She asked her husband once. Constantly living through other lives sometimes makes the harshest reality flicker. He raised his eyebrows so high they might disappear altogether, saying no more. Why not? Prem insisted. She didn't know why that day she was especially reckless. To see prostitutes perform their tricks in front of 100 people rather than one? Of course, all actresses are supposed to be prostitutes themselves, as well as daughters of prostitutes, like Sushila Bala, who acted in Bilet Perut, simultaneously swooned over as a star and derided as a whore. Young men of rich families are known to squander their youth in the honeycombs of such queen bees, then grow into irate ranters and damn them as the very gates to hell. Prem leaves the room. All those beautiful, stylish, poised women in the films, nothing but prostitutes? Maybe, but who made them so? In her heart of hearts, she doesn't give a bloody damn as long as the women act, look, and sing beautifully. After all, she sputters mutely, what are you, old sinner, but a prostitute of the English? Who was Lillian Hartfield? What did you make her? She's not shocked at her inner diatribe and goes to the bioscope as before and thoroughly enjoys herself and sheds tears when poor distressed beauties weep and laughs when the effete Bengali Sahib trips over his arrogance and folly and claps mightily when the nice young man, true to his Indian roots, indeed proud of his Indian roots, rescues the beauty and crushes his vile, slavish adversary. So I'm going to take a pause there. Christy and I have kind of thought about a sequence here. So Christy, what would you like to do? Do you want to invite questions?
Hey, I'm on mute.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's all right.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can certainly have questions. I was just taking notes about some of the, trying to catch quotes from what you were reading that I thought were great. The first excerpt that you read, that line, all is burning and she should have burned too, that very ominous and sets us up for kind of, yeah, you know, wanting to read more and trying to figure out what that really means. And
Right.
yeah, and then, the way you describe certain things like the men that they squander their youth in honeycombs such as these, and I know I missed a piece, but boy, that was a great description of what that really, what
Yeah.
that really should look like or feel like or whatever, what we can imagine, right?
Yeah, thank you. And yes, so this era in Bengal is when, or in India is when there are a number of people who are still very anglicized and Anglophile, and they are in distinct contrast to the large body of the nation that wants the English to leave. And that is going to happen a little bit later. In fact, I'll show you a couple of slides about when Indians organize and to ask the British to leave. They say, quit India. And the British don't want to leave. And then until the war and other things happen, England refuses to give independence to India. And even when it does, it leaves a deep cut in the body of the nation that we will see, becomes two countries at that point. And it's really just something the British engineered and did extremely carelessly. So, yeah, I mean, this is an interesting time. People probably don't know much about the early 20th century in India, but it is, I think, a very vivid and troubled and at the same time sort of inspiring time in terms of fighting colonialism, especially, and racism, especially.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know a lot about it. So yeah, do you want to jump to the slideshow?
Yeah, we can do that because I think it'll put things in context more. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
So I'll just start reading. This is my this is another cute picture of my novel, Love's Garden, and I just wanted to show you a clean image of it. We can go to the next slide. This is my effort to give you a kind of visual sense of scenes from my novel and the setting, both imagined and real settings. So it's in a house very much like this, in a green and quiet village. A woman called Saroj, whom we read about the first time, the first chapter, lived with a secret past and had a daughter named Prem, about whom I read just the second passage I read was about her. Can we move to the next one? So Saroj's secret concerned an ancient practice banned by the British in the 19th century that nevertheless continues actually in remote parts of India. This is the practice called sati, meaning a widow being burned on her husband's pyre and so attaining sainthood, according to men, of course. And here we see a 19th century sati. This is I don't know what you can see if my cursor does anything, but the woman on the pile of logs and things is the sati, the widow. Her husband has died, and she has been brought to the pyre supposedly voluntarily. She wants to kill or sacrifice herself so she can go to heaven forever and be sanctified. That's what the family says. That's what the men say. Now, as you can see, there are men standing around with weapons. Some of them are actually pikes and bamboo sticks. The reality is that a lot of times these women were forced onto the pyre and even beaten down, so they couldn't escape, and they did burn down with their husbands. This is a thing that has ripped Saroja's life apart in many interesting ways, and the motif of burning will come up again and again in the novel. Next, please. So if you think sati is gone, let me tell you that the last well-known sati, publicized, protested, etc., occurred in India as late as 1987, when an 18-year-old woman named Roop Kanwar was burned with her husband, it being said that she had thereby attained sainthood. But it was a known and common practice to drug or beat into submission widows who wouldn't accept the ritual voluntarily. We don't know what happened with Rup Kanwar, as we probably wouldn't know with most people in this situation, because the women didn't have a voice. They couldn't really either speak or report anything about their experience. But the ruse was that you go to heaven, and we basically take your late husband's property and everything that belonged to him, and we don't have to give it to someone else. We'll keep it in the family. This was one of the underlying reasons, really, for sati. Next, please. So here we have maybe Prem, Saroj's daughter, who was luckier in that she married a rich man in British India and went to live in his mansion in the great city of Calcutta, which was then the capital of the British in India. Well, she's lucky in one way, as the novel will tell you if you read it. And maybe she looked a little bit like this, a vision of loveliness as a traditional Indian bride on her wedding day. Next. Perhaps Prem, now Lady Mitter, came to live in a mansion in Calcutta in 1919, her husband Sir Naren Mitter's home, that looked much like this. In a gilded cage in the poshest part of town with a much older man whom she despised for being an unpatriotic lackey of the British. And sure enough, Prem has her own secret and an old ache in her heart. Maybe this is how the Mitter family looked. Her life as Lady Mitter would look magnificent and glamorous to all on the outside. So she is the beautiful woman sitting to the left and the boy standing to her left, with a young son, an adopted daughter, and a husband who prided himself on wealth and favors from the ruling race. Oops, I don't know why we've come to the first one. Huh, something didn't quite go up there.
No, hold on just one second.
Okay. And if you guys have any questions or thoughts, please speak up. This is clearly very informal, so we will be happy to just chat. So the other things I am going to show you are basically scenes of political turmoil and various kinds of struggles. Can you see it?
Yep. Hmm.
Cool.
Definitely.
All right. So then we're going to move on past that last family photo. But the Indians had begun to rise against British colonialism, and many martyrs were made and many brave lives given to the cause. The British were not inclined to lose the jewel in the crown, and Gandhi and Nehru, the two main political leaders and inspirers, led a people's war against empire, David and Goliath. They said firmly, quit India in 1942, if only. And war came to India too, in all its terrors and its everydayness. The jewel in the crown was being loosened. This is an image of any street, any major street in Calcutta in the 1940s, and it would be unrecognizable today because of the population explosion, but it was a gracious, beautiful, and architecturally splendid colonial city, but colonized. And here are some American and British soldiers in one of the streets in Calcutta who were at that time, around 1942, thronging the city because of the war and because the war had moved to its eastern front or eastern stage. A lot of Europeans, Americans, soldiers, and officers and their female companions were in Calcutta. I mean, Calcutta was a very cosmopolitan city in that sense, but also just in terms of um, the um, its spirit even today. And so I wanted to show you, Hitler seemed to be winning, Europe was in ruins, and India sided with its own conquerors against fascism out of principle, not for gain. British did tentatively say, well, if we win the war and you support us, maybe we'll think about giving you dominion status, which did not really happen. A terrifying Japanese bomber, these were called Mitsubishi Sallies, I'm sorry about the typo, in the skies of Calcutta. And one time there was a significant bombing, and during that time, Lady Prem Mitter would lose something and someone very dear to her again. And when the war ended in 1945 and the British finally left India in 1947, as I said, before they left, they cut the country with one last cruel stroke, dividing India into Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan. Hindu Muslim rioting broke out, fierce, violent, and bloody, as Hindus fled Pakistan and Muslims fled India. And the Mitter Empire began to totter with the end of empire, and darkness covered the life of Prem. The British watched and laughed and went home. 6 million dead in the partition of India. Among them, another piece of Lady Prem Mitter's breaking heart. Here are some images of trains pulling into India or Pakistan and, in fact, carrying thousands of slaughtered bodies from both sides. So, mobs would rush these trains and they would actually kill everyone, um, presuming they were of the opposite religious faith, Hindu versus Muslim. And flourishing cities became graveyards. This is a scene from Lahore in Pakistan during the partition. I just showed you that. And yet, the strength of women does prevail. And in her later years, this great lady from Calcutta returns to the village where once she'd been a girl, and there she creates a new life and a new era for herself, as did Mother India, as we still call her. And that's that. That's about all the cute pictures I'm going to show you. So, do you want me to move back to reading the final passage and then seeing if there's any discussion?
Yeah, sure. There is one question from Karin. And
Okay.
Karin, if you'd like to speak directly, you certainly can. Just turn your video on and unmute yourself, or yeah, that's up to you.
Sure. Karen, if you want to come on or not, it's fine. I'll just answer the question. Hi.
Hey, sorry, I was walking my dog, so
Good to see your face. We're all
it's good to see you. And I love your novel. I haven't read it yet, but I plan to. I remember when we read together, Readings on the Pike, I believe it was.
I remember, yes, I
Okay.
remember. And I think I remember you from Instagram as well.
Okay, yeah,
Maybe?
yeah.
I don't know. So, yes, that's a wonderful question. Beautiful readings of characters, yeah. Yes, I think they are, even though they are largely imagined, they're kind of hybrids of stories from my own family and women that I have both heard stories about and then sort of alchemized in fiction into maybe things that they didn't do or they wouldn't have done, but they certainly could have, and women like them certainly did, and they did go through these things. So that's what brought me these particular women. And the genesis of the novel, initially it was like a novel about a feeling, like almost like homesickness, which of course doesn't make a novel. So you have to have a story, you have to have characters, damn it. And what happened is that after writing about the generational saga, which I sort of had in my head, the traumas in the lives of these women that will be passed on, but in the end, the women will gather and they will regroup and go on without the men or even supporting the men in their lives. But I realized that there was a private story, but there was no public story. And in a novel like this, I meant it to be historical fiction. There has to be a public element. And then I thought, what am I waiting for? Because 20th century India is a maelstrom of historical agitation and events. And so I kind of started to research the World War, the Second World War, which was the more impactful war for India. Even though in the First World War, millions of Indians actually fought all across the empire for the British. But then I came across the story of a pilot, and he was involved in fighting the Japanese Sallies when they came. And he kind of became my linchpin. He was actually British. He was a real person. He was British. And unfortunately, he was shot down and his body was never recovered. And that kind of became a hook for me, or a bridge to cross fertilize the women's stories with the stories of all the tumultuous public events that were taking place at that time. So it was really almost like coincidence. I can't really give a better reason, except I did a lot of research, and I did my best to represent the time period faithfully. But yeah. So what kind of work do you write,
Well,
Karen?
the sections is in terms of historical fiction, the sections that you read are so vivid, and you feel like you're right there. So, and I understand how much time and effort it takes to do the research for historical fiction. And from what you heard of our readings that we did together, my novel is also it's funny because I don't think of it as historical fiction because it wasn't that long ago, but yes, it was that long ago.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I know.
the 60s and 70s, the
Yeah,
1960s and 70s were that long ago. But I understand, just once you start researching, how it can be sort of this funnel that you get pulled into, and you discover things that you wouldn't think you would never suspect, and how that leads even further into creating a narrative, especially for your for
yeah,
your
yeah.
women, the characters that you were just reading to us. So it's fascinating. Thank you for reading to us, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. You're asking great questions, and I loved what you read at the Pike reading.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So, um, someone is saying, I'll jump in when there is a pause. Well, there is a pause now, I think.
So this is Leo. I guess I can even do that. Anyhow, thanks for the passages that you've read so far. They're, as was said, they're really vivid accounts of the time. It seems like the world hasn't really changed very much. It just seems like the technology has moved on, the contexts are different, but the same old sort of violence and exploitation, and sort of exploitation through colonization is still occurring. So, modern day Syria might be a place similar to then India, or
Absolutely.
even parts of India today.
Except now the superpowers are different. They're no longer Britain. Of course, I've been watching The Crown on Netflix, and it's sort of like this other window onto how the British Empire really did end. And then, of course, America took over. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt though.
So I was wondering if, what's the insight from kind of looking in this retrospective way to maybe taking a path towards a different kind of world in the future? If there's any sort of insight other than just get rid of all those old white guys.
I was just going to say that. Well, I do think that foregrounding the ordinary person, and certainly in this regard, women and probably other oppressed minorities and races could bring about a difference. But quite honestly, when I look at the military industrial complex, I can't imagine how long it might take and what kinds of sacrifices and bloodbaths there would probably have to be. The thing is, no one gives up power willingly. Everybody has to be fought off from their course when they have the power. And it's very difficult for ordinary people to mobilize to the extent that they can do that. I'm not very hopeful about this. I'm not sure history teaches us anything. I think it does, but I think it also just kind of repeats itself, unfortunately, which is not a reason to give up hope, but I don't have a prophecy. But that's a
Right.
great
Well,
question.
I
Thank
guess knowing that the dragon is the fact that sort of to overcome bad power, one has to become an even greater power and potentially an even worse power.
I think you like sci-fi.
Really?
I
What
think
was
so.
your first clue?
Oh, the dragon.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, I don't have an answer. I couldn't say. I do know that I do believe that women could make a big difference. And that's why my writing is generally about women and the changes that they do bring about as much as possible. We have to empower women and girls. Let's
For
just
sure.
put it that way.
I think one aspect of the story might also be the Asian soldier who sort of went through a great deal of hardship and risk and lost a lot of comrades in the process. It just seems like in the end, he's tired of the racism that's applied to him and the limitations that causes, but also just tired of the physical hot conflict, because it's just so personally taxing. So maybe there's an opportunity for leverage in there somewhere too.
And coincidentally, that is the passage, the last passage I was going to read you about this Japanese American man who, as I said, they were thronging Calcutta, all the clubs, the, um, the restaurants, um, the race course, the parade grounds. There were just European and American people all over, not only because the British were already there to a certain extent, though it wasn't a settler colony for them, obviously, but because of the war. And so I wanted to read you this last bit, not quite at the end of the novel, but this is that soldier whose life is kind of peripherally but strongly connected to the events of the main characters in the novel. Yellow isn't a great color in this year, 1942. This is clear to Amherst Ishuru Buck, so-called American hero of the forgotten army of the Allies in the war to end all wars. Sergeant Buck does not want to die a hero's death. He's watched friends and fellows die those. In the Burmese forest, to distract himself, he invents whole fantasy futures with girls he's never met, girls who probably wouldn't choose him anyway. It's always been like that with him. He's always looked different, neither this nor that. But when shelling starts in the forests of Mpumga, and there's nowhere to go from that impossible bluff of mountain, his company, the 2nd Battalion of the Marauders, has already been there 5 days. His heart begins to turn to ash, thinking he'll never be with the girl again at all. The Japanese are all around, shelling constantly, heavy casualties, words that sound just like words until they happen around you. Never, too, is a word like a bullet with the range of infinity. What can it possibly mean? The 2nd Battalion's perimeter, 400 by 250 yards on top of a 2,800-foot high saddle of ground that dominates the surrounding terrain, is filling with shit and gangrene. At night, the forest smells like the collective fear and rage of the men marooned on the bluff. That smell will never leave Amherst fully. Also, the smell of agony, longing, and vomit. The men sleep and wake fitfully or not at all. Their suffering feels like airlessness rather than pain. Then the Japs capture the waterhole. Then Amherst and a few others like him, yellow men, Americans with Asian mixed in, start to be sent out at dead of night to try and bring back water. The second time, Amherst's mate Sterling gets shut down. He has to leave Sterling. Father's name Tanaka, mother American, old San Francisco family at the hole. He just barely gets back himself. They don't talk about death, or about relief, or about home, or about girls, apple pie, or football games by silent pact, among the many pacts that men fighting and dying together make with one another. They can no longer bear it, but there's nothing they can do. They have to bear it. They bear it. On the ninth morning, Amherst is keeping track of the days for no reason he can name. Robbie Mook points his index finger upward at the sky. Deakins, with a foot already turning a mottled marble maroon from where he stepped on some shrapnel 2 days ago, groans and rubs his eyes. Amherst will remember as if it's a movie he watched. Though the sun is barely visible through the trees above, bits and pieces of a leaden sky can be seen, and the occasional plane cuts through the patchy gray blue like a silver arrow. They've run out of water 2 days ago. The water hole is in the crosshairs of the Japanese a few 100 feet away, and below, even if you slither to it like a worm, you risk getting a nice thwacking bullet in your noggin as you try to dip your makeshift water bag into the stinking, crusted water. Sterling and his maggots are keeping guard at the approach. Case in point. His body probably is still there. Has Sterling's blood mixed with the hole's water? Probably. And then Robbie says, "Look, fellas, look." He tries to buck upward but can't. Keeps pointing up though, looking as if he's giving the sky the wrong finger. "Oh, pipe down, would ya?" Someone a few bodies away grunts. And then the water bags start dropping. Planes like angels have brought relief. Manna has dropped from heaven. Robbie Mook is shuddering and weeping, rolling on the wet ground toward the bags as they fall. Stray Japanese bullets from below blow a few bags into silver showers. There's shouting and yee-hawing and whooping. There's sobbing and retching. Amherst can only think that Sterling won't be needing any water. He's quite dead. Sorry. Um, in a few minutes, the bags stop falling, the droning and the planes go away, but they're alive and it's morning and they know they might live at least another day. They are the company to be famous later as Merrill's Marauders. Howdy, goddammit. Some of them say they are the fightin' Aggies. They say whoop a lot. Still alive on that hilltop, a bunch of men in raggedy clothes, stringy hair, and dead eyes, dancing jigs and backslapping each other. And then on the 11th day, the 1st and 3rd battalions break through to them. They find broken men who have aged years, not days, during the siege. Lucky for Amherst and Robbie and Deakins, Sterling is just plain old dead. I think that's all I want to inflict on you today.
Very vivid images of war. Wow. There may be a couple more questions, but I did want to pop in after all of that. I think just that recent discussion with Leo about, what are the next steps? How do you change things? I think part of it is just bringing awareness to an audience who may not be familiar, and that certainly comes from stories. Sometimes we get tired of reading the news, but we'll pick up a book, and even though it's a novel, even though it's fiction, there's always some truth in that fiction, and of course, especially with historical fiction. So
Mhm.
that's a big part of why we write, why we read, why I want to help spotlight books like this, so that there's an awareness, and even if history repeats itself, um, you can't ignore it. And so in that way, once you know about it, you're somewhat responsible to do something different. Um,
Yeah.
so thank you for doing that work and for sharing that. And I wondered about you talked about when the British left, there was that great division,
Mhm.
and um, I'm curious how that division has resonated to the India of today. I mean, of course, I'm sure that there are scars and there are still responses to it, but I'm just curious of what that looks like today. And then
Oh
Leo,
yeah.
I see you probably have another comment too.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the reasons to write this novel for me was to try and make people think about what women go through in wars, in conflicts that are created by men and usually run by men and fought by men. But there's another war inside that is not recorded, not thought about, and that is the war of the women in that environment. In terms of the question about the partition, which is what it was called, so undivided India was broken up into India and Pakistan on the logic that Indian Hindus should be in one place and Indian Muslims should go to another place, and that place now becomes Pakistan. So, as I said, 6 million people died and they were slaughtered by each other. And the slaughterers were sometimes old neighbors or friends, even if they were from different religions. Before this, they had lived side by side for centuries in many cases. The man who cut this line dividing India and Pakistan was known as Cyril Radcliffe. He was just a bureaucrat. He knew nothing about India, but he was brought at the time and told, "Do this." And he did it the best he could. I mean, which was horribly. He literally cut through someone's latrine and someone's mosque. I mean, there was no logic to the line whatsoever. So as people fled, I mean, there are these images of what were caravans, essentially, people either just walking with their families and their few belongings, or these trains, which became um, a very horrific motif for the partition, because they brought in actually compartments full of dead people. And so in the latter part of my novel, there is a good deal about that. And there is also this character who Prem is, actually her foster daughter, who becomes a victim in that whole imbroglio, because among other things, women were attacked. Not only were men killing men, but they were raping, killing, and sometimes abducting women. And no one talked about this in India for 30 years after independence. No one talked about it in Pakistan. In the 80s, feminist scholarship started uncovering these stories. And often these stories are called silences, because these women just would not. I mean, some of them had been abducted and were living in they had had families and children, and they had basically just been taken over to the other place, and they had had to build lives for themselves, but they wouldn't talk about what had happened to them. But then a lot of accounts have been published since then. And I mean, it was a Holocaust for especially women that, the world hasn't heard of. We know about the Nazi Holocaust, but we don't know that this was another place where 6 million people killed each other in a civil war caused by a colonizer, essentially, who kind of, took a last stand. So it's a very powerful image. Today, even today, India and Pakistan are constantly at loggerheads. There's the history, there's the memory of that violence. but alongside some of the tropes are repeated, like Hindus will say, oh, Muslims, they marry 5 women, they treat their women abysmally, they whatever. And Muslims will say, oh, those Hindus, they're such hypocrites, this, that, the other thing. I mean, those wounds have not gone away. And in fact, it figures into international politics, because Pakistan and the US were at one time, in each other's beds. Now, probably not so much. It all shifts. But that that trauma in South Asia has resonated down time, right up to our times. You're absolutely right about that. And I did want to make that clear in the novel. I hope I have to some extent.
Thank you. Leo, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I guess I have a very narrow educational background, and so I wasn't aware of sort of much of these kinds of conflicts throughout history, other than, for example, the Nazi Holocaust and the First and Second World Wars. That's really all that was kind of commonplace and familiar in the place that I grew up. But yeah, it just seems that history is woven from these giant hot conflicts. It's really kind of sad, and as Nandini said earlier, does not admit much hope, I think. I think empowering women is going to be a really key part of making any kind of change, but that road is going to be so long.
Arduous, let's say.
Right.
Well, I really appreciate your comments and questions, and yeah, read the book if you like.
Nandini, is there a way that we can order the book from you rather than Amazon, like to get a signed copy or whatever? I was looking at the website.
I can't provide it, but my publisher will, sell you a copy. Also, bookshop, bookshop or IndieBound or what's that other store? I mean, there are a number of independent stores where you can buy it. I know Bookshop has it.
And probably just ordering it from a local bookshop and they can get it in. If you special order, I think any bookshop can get any books.
Okay,
That's good to know.
I didn't know the details of that. So I can just write down my publisher's name here, and they have a website, and I think they have their, their listings, book listings for sale, and they will also fulfill those orders. I don't know how Bookshop does it, but they probably do something very similar.
I think they provide a lot of profit. It's a fair system as far as what the publisher and you are getting.
Yeah,
they're doing.
I mean, I hate Amazon, but what are we gonna do? I'm not there yet that I couldn't put my book on Amazon and it would still get sold. So
thank you for this afternoon.
Wonderful.
I'm really
great to meet you. See you again. And thank you so much, Leo and Christy. I so appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I dropped the link for Abed Publishing in the website link is there in the chat, and the one for bookshop.org if you'd like to go through them. They do, as Karin was saying, they do send a portion of their funds to different independent bookstores. So that's a great alternative to Amazon if you want to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but certainly thank you for the discussion and the questions. It was really, really nice. It's fun to do a reading that's just a little bit different. And I appreciated the slides, the images, and the readings, and all the discussion that followed. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Karin one thing. So is your book available through these venues also?
Okay. It's funny. The entire from when I spoke with Christy, which was I think December 18th, we had our little moment like this with Hidden Timber, and literally a month before that, my book, there was no book. There was no book to buy. And I won't say anything, I won't name the distributor, but it was definitely the distributor's fault. It was not the publisher. And so for 6 weeks, nobody could buy it. It was on back, waiting to leave some warehouse. But now I hope it's available through Bookshop and anywhere.
All right.
So, yeah.
I will. Can you just type in the title? Because I forgot.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And it's also, I think Kristen put up our hour that we had back in December. So there's that. That was a really great hour. Thank you, Christy, again.
Sure.
It's up on YouTube
Mhm.
if you go to her website. And I'll type in, it's Sibelia Drive.
Right.
It's,
There was something drive, but
it's got,
yes.
but we're talking about your book.
No,
So-
this is good. This is all good.
Well, you know,
It's
yeah, part
our
of,
books.
right. And part of these events is to bring different authors together and with readers and to talk about different small presses. So I think it's great. And that, Karin, that you're here. And I'm looking up on bookshop.org right now, your book as well. So I'll drop that link in the comments.
Cool.
And yeah, if you want to check out the YouTube channel from hiddentimberbooks.com, there's a ton of readings, including Karin's, and Nandini's will be up there after I do a little editing here. And yeah, we're going to keep on keeping on with 2021, doing more readings coming down the line. So hopefully we'll see you all again.
We're going to keep on keeping on. Thank you. Cheers,
Yep.
everyone.
Yeah, thank
Thanks,
you so
everybody.
much.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Thanks for putting this on.
Take care.
Yep, thanks, Leo. Bye-bye.
Bye.